Welcome to the presentation about the Community Need paper. You can follow along by looking at the Community Need paper document. That is a document that gives all the details and explanations for the paper. This particular presentation will mostly just be an audio version of that, where I'll be reading off of that, but I will give a few additional explanations and comments in this presentation to help clarify a few things. Some students really like that. So let's go. So let's go through a quick summary of your paper. Your paper is going to be on a topic regarding a community need. You're going to write about a specific need in a specific community. Now, it doesn't have to be your community or even a local community, but it does need to be about a specific place, preferably a city or town or county. Your paper needs to then be specific enough where it relates to a specific area, a specific location, obviously a community. Your paper can relate to your major or an area of strong interest. That's up to you. But obviously, if you're majoring in criminal justice or health sciences or whatever else, it's probably helpful to have a paper that will focus on things that you know a little bit more about being in that major. But again, that's totally up to you. If possible, use part of your paper to describe an organization working to serve this need. Now, we'll get into more details about that later. That can be an organization currently in that location and in that community working to meet the need, or it could be about a different organization in another city or town that's doing something that you would like to see something similar in the community that you're discussing. Again, that is not mandatory, but it will be helpful and it will give you some good content if you do describe an organization like that. Your paper should be centered around supporting a thesis statement. That's an arguable claim. Again, you've been through writing one. You should know what that means. If not, go back and look in your textbooks and read up on thesis statements and make sure that you are able to do that. Let's get into some more detailed instructions now. Again, we're able to see all these things on the document that's available on our course as well. So you can print that out and have a copy of that to kind of keep next to you as you work. Here are some detailed instructions then. You can use scholarly and other sources to examine a need within a community, preferably one with which you are somewhat familiar. That's helpful because you'll know a little bit more about the community. You may know people to talk to about it. You may know some resources to look up that other people might not. If you just randomly choose a community out there, you might struggle a little bit more. So try to come up with something that you at least know a little bit about as far as the community itself. Now, while most scholarly and other credible sources may not mention your community by name, you can use the information from those sources to help describe the causes, symptoms, and effects of the need. And we will talk more about how to do that in some of the presentations for this unit, so don't worry if you're not quite sure what I mean by that. We'll have some examples of that as well, even within this presentation. You also want to try to bring in at least some specific local information or data to help support your claim that there is a need in the specific community you choose. Now, we'll be going through how to look up local information in a couple of different presentations. You can also bring in local news stories or reports to add information and examples, and that's very helpful. Another thing you can do then that I recommend, it's optional but strongly advised, that you discuss one or two local organizations working to help address the need. Now, sometimes this will be the case. There's no organization that's working to help address a need in the particular community you're studying. So then you could discuss organizations elsewhere who serve that need. So for example, if you say, well, in Marshall County we have this need, and there isn't really an organization working to serve that, but I know of one, down in a county in southern Indiana that does something similar. Well, okay, you could talk about how that organization works and how they're doing well and why we need an organization like them in Marshall County. So you could definitely do that. As part of that, you might need to include an interview or two with organization staff. And again, we'll have a presentation and some reading on how to do interviews and some of those other primary sources. In addition, these organizations often are a fantastic source of information about your topic, especially within your chosen community. You can usually, those organizations, they've already done some research because they they know why they're needed, they know more about the community, and they may be able to point you to some good information. So it's good to talk with them and look at their websites and things like that. And again, you always want to use details. Details are very important in writing, and this is no exception. Let's talk about the research requirements for this paper. You're going to need a minimum of 8 sources. And again, you're in Writing 2 now. You need to make sure that you're being responsible with your sources. So at least 2 of these need to be scholarly journal articles. And those can be found on EBSCOhost or in a hard copy journal. You might be able to find them on Gale Cengage as well. EBSCOhost and Gale Cengage are online periodical databases available through our library, as you should know from Writing 1. But in case you are a little rusty or need some refresher, we will cover that within our course on how to really get good things out of those. Keep in mind, too, just because you find it on EBSCOhost or Gale Cengage does not mean it's a scholarly journal article. So you need to make sure that you are getting scholarly journal articles. You can also go into the library and look through some of these journals. That's what we call a hard copy journal. You're actually looking through the physical copy there. I highly recommend that if you are able to be on campus and look through some, or possibly could go to another college or university campus. They have plenty of journals around that you can look through too. You also need to include at least 2 primary sources, preferably at least 1 interview. Again, I'm assuming that you know what primary source means from Writing 1, but we will cover again what that means and how to do some of those things, especially the interviews. So we'll expand on that information and really give you a lot more about that. And you are going to be required to use at least 2 primary sources. You are going to need to use at least 1 book, and I realize some of us struggle with that. But you'll need to use a library, use a book. It could be an e-book, but it does need to be a book because we want to make sure that you know how to use books in your research. And it could be even just a small part or a chapter within a book. It doesn't mean you're using the whole book. It just means that you have picked up a book or you've used an ebook and you found something within that. That's something where individually I can help you and give you some ideas on that. That does include textbooks as well. So if there's a textbook where you learned about something that you want to use from the textbook, that is fine. Again, I'm happy to work with you on any of these things and help give you ideas and talk about them with you. Also, with the sources, any non-print web sources must be credible sources with an identifiable author whose credentials make him or her worthy of your paper, and or a credible news journalism site. You're going to lose points on your paper if your sources are not shown to be credible. And you can talk with me ahead of time about what those are. Or if you use Wikipedia, about.com, easyarticles.com, or similar sites as sources. You are going to be turning in your sources ahead of time and letting me see what you're coming up with so that I can give you feedback on those. So some of you will probably struggle to find sources. I'm happy to help you with those as well. But again, make sure that you're using credible sources. Here's some other requirements that you need to know for the paper. It needs to be 10 full pages. That does not include the works cited or references page, depending on whether you use MLA or APA format, or 3,500 words minimum. So again, 10 full pages, that means full pages, or 3,500 words minimum. Now, this is a longer paper than you've written for Writing 1, obviously. Some of you have probably written papers this long for other classes. But part of the whole goal of Writing 2 is that you are going to be able to write longer papers, and you have plenty of time to write this. You have a lot of time to write this, more time than you'll get in some other classes on the sophomore, especially junior, senior level. And you can do this. So this is definitely very doable. If you passed Writing 1, you are very capable of doing this. They need to be in MLA or APA format. You do need to include a works cited or references page, depending which format you use. Images are allowed. That includes pictures or graphs, but any images used need to be approved and included in the mandatory rough draft. That includes the size of the image, things like that. Please try to only include 1 image per every 3 pages. I hope you'll use images just as a way of making your paper better. It's not required that you do so, but again, that is one thing that you can do to kind of help yours along. You can also use block quotes, but you can only use them twice in the paper. I've had issues in the past where students try to include these really long block quotes one after the other, to where it's really not like they wrote a paper at all, and that's obviously not good. And we are going to use Turnitin with this paper. Some of you are familiar with that from previous semesters. I'll have a separate tutorial on how to use all that. We do have some restrictions on this paper, and part of this is because this is writing 2 and we need to advance our writing skills. There were a lot of things in writing 1 that you may or may not have gotten away with because we were trying to work on specific skills. In writing 2, though, it's going to be a little tighter, as it should be. So with writing 2, one restriction is no recycled papers. No turning in papers that you've turned in for other classes or for writing 1. Even if I taught your writing 1 class, please don't recycle your papers. And that may show up on Turnitin if you do. It may not, but I might find out another way. But again, that is a no-no. If you plan to use your research for this paper as part of another current class's project, you are required to request permission from the other class's professor and provide it to your writing 2 instructor. Otherwise, failure to do so may result in your work being viewed as plagiarism or unethical, so just ask and see if it's allowed. So here's what I'm saying here. Yes, like I said before, no recycled papers. Don't turn in papers you've used for other classes. However, if you are currently in 2 classes and you say, wow, there's some overlap between the things that I could be working with here. Maybe some research that I'm doing for my sociology class would apply to what I'm doing in my writing 2 paper. Again, using some of the same research is okay, but again, a number of us use Turnitin here, and if we start seeing you turn in basically the same paper, even with just a little bit of a change in it for multiple courses, that may not be okay. And for writing 2, I want this to be an original paper, original to this class. So if you want to have some overlap in research, that's fine. That's a good idea if you can pull that off. But again, you're not writing the same paper for 2 different classes. Another thing, this paper is not intended to be political or about changing laws. So you can write about a community need, and some of those do get into political issues, absolutely. But this is not a paper about politics. This is not about voting out the current bums and changing them, and things like that. So this is not, about just changing laws and leaving it with that. Because a lot of times it's easy to say we can change the laws, but then not get specific, and we're left with no real solution then. So while many of these papers deal with social issues, this project is not intended to be a soapbox for you to just kind of rant and give lots of opinions and that's it. Again, this is more about identifying needs and real needs and solutions. While a discussion of a political climate or decision and its relevance as community need would certainly be appropriate, your paper shouldn't just be one big rant. Another thing is Wikipedia is not an acceptable source for this paper. It's okay for gathering basic background information and finding some credible sources, but you're not going to use Wikipedia or a Wikipedia article as one of your sources in this paper. I've included a list of general topic ideas. Obviously, these are not the only options. These are just to help us better understand and generate some ideas. Within a classroom, we would actually probably spend some time discussing some specific ideas within this. On an online course, you're a little bit more self-directed. You'll have to do some of that, but I'm happy to work with you and talk with you about your topic ideas. We'll have a discussion forum specifically set aside for that as well. So here's some different ideas. I'm not going to read through and give an explanation for each one of them, but these are just some ideas to get us started. And again, if you're interested in any of these, feel free to discuss them in more depth with me. The key thing that you're going to see over and over and over throughout this is get specific. The more specific an issue you can write about, usually the better. Here's a more detailed example that you can look at just to give you some ideas on what you could write about and what I mean by details and some different research ideas, things like that. One thing that you can look at then is an example like child obesity. Now, again, that's a general topic, so you'd want to apply that to a specific community. So here are some ideas on how to do that. You could have some sort of general information related to child obesity. That's usually going to be the same from one community to another. Now, you can see on here that I've put this is a growing problem, particularly in lower income communities. So that might help you with a little bit of a focus. But again, a lot of the information you gather will not be specifically exactly about your community that you're writing about, because that information is not specific only to that community. It's general. Child obesity is a problem nationwide, and the problems that might be, related to child obesity here in Marshall or Stark County will probably be applicable in many other places too. So you could include a basic a definition of obesity, especially as it relates to children, an explanation of what causes child obesity, why it might be prevalent in specific communities, particularly low income. And that would be where you might start hinting at or giving some more information about that specific community. We'll get into that more later. You could also discuss some short-term and long-term effects of poor nutrition and child obesity on education, physical health, mental health, research on what could help avoid and prevent obesity in children, news reports on childhood obesity, discussion of the role of fast food and school lunches on child obesity, research on how to help children overcome obesity. Again, all of those things, you may not need all of those things in one paper, but those are a few ideas. And again, a lot of that will be more general information that then you can, as you move along in your paper, then you can start applying that to your specific community. So for example, you could get some demographics information and research about a specific community. And again, you may not be able to find specific statistics on child obesity in that community, but you could say, well, we know it's a problem with a lot of low income or a specific population. Some ethnicities do have a little bit more childhood obesity related to them, and you could look at, well, we have this percentage of people within my community, and the rates tend to go up a little bit for them. Why is that? What's the issue? We're not really sure. We can do more research about that, but we can kind of apply that to the community. You could do even some personal observations of obese children in the community. We have to be really careful when doing personal observations. We'll talk about that more in that presentation. But again, that could help to look in your community and do some type of observation. And as you get into some of the other topics that you could write about for your papers, some of them, this will be more appropriate than others, but it's one thing you could do. You could also interview people from that community to help you get a better sense of that, and that'll really help. And so we see some ideas here on how to do that, and some ideas on who we could interview about the specific community and how childhood obesity relates to that. Part 2 of this detailed example then gets a little bit more into the part that I talked about earlier about how it is a really great idea to look at a local group or organization working with that issue. So again, that's highly recommended. And you could include this in your paper. Profile a local group working with a specific issue. Now, you may not be able to find a group whose primary focus is related to your issue in and of itself. So there may not be a group that says, our specific goal, our primary focus is childhood obesity. But you could get into other groups that help with the issue a bit, like local boys and girls clubs or other after-school programs that provide activities. And, that's kind of a big one, because you look at one of the causes for childhood obesity is the fact that many children simply don't have that period of activity, that hour or two a day where they have the chance to run around, play with other kids, do physical things. Instead, they're going home, playing video games, watching TV, doing something sedentary, and even that hour or two makes a big difference. And there are national organizations that focus on helping children and helping parents get educated about how that 60 or 90 minutes a day makes a big difference. Another thing you could look at is independent sports leagues, and that definitely deals with the issue. They may not say our primary goal is to deal with childhood obesity, but it definitely fits here because it helps give them that activity. Maybe a local farmers market. That's another way of looking at it from the nutritional point of view. Maybe you could get into a national program that you could say, we need a local chapter of that here. How do we implement their ideas on the local level? Does that happen with the schools? Does it happen with a new organization that need to come to town, something like that? How would we work with them? So hopefully this detailed example gave you a lot of ideas. Depending on how your own topic shakes out, you may have one that looks kind of similar to what the example that I've given. You may have something that goes in a completely different direction. That's okay. I really love seeing the great ideas that students come up with, and I think you'll come up with some good ideas. I'm always happy to brainstorm with you, and work with you on coming up with ideas and research ideas and content ideas as well. So I hope you'll contact me and work with me and let me help you if you need it. All right. I hope this paper goes really well for you, and good luck.